Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I am going to be talking about a musician who has been my favourite sax player for well over 23 plus years. And the first time that I became aware of him was back in 1998 during the Twist Of Jobim tour, when I went to see the Lee Ritenour band at the Royal Festival Hall, and this sax player was a member of that touring band, and in my opinion he was one of the standout musicians of that show. And ever since then I have been a huge hardcore fan of his, and he hasn't just played with Lee Ritenour, he has also played with a number of great artists such as David Benoit, Keiko Matsui, Brian Culbertson. He has also collaborated with Randy Brecker, Chuck Loeb, Jeff Lorber, and he was a member of the Jeff Lorber Fusion Band. He has also collaborated with Russ Freeman and was a member of the Rippingtons for a number of years. He was also a member of the GRP All-Star Big Band, Special Effects All-Stars, but in my opinion he will forever be known for his long association as a member of the classic lineup of the Chick Corea Electric Band. And the gentleman I am talking about is, of course, saxophonist Eric Marienthal. Now, Eric Marienthal burst onto the scene back in the mid-80s, and he was often accused of being a David Sanborn clone, but for me, Eric Marienthal is anything but a David Sanborn clone. He is very much his own man, he has his own identity and a very distinct sound, and when you hear him, you know straight away who it is, and he's a very highly versatile, skilled player. He can play tenor saxophone, alto saxophone, soprano saxophone, flutes, clarinets, and he has even dabbled on the electric wind instrument, aka the iwi, and he can play any style of music from jazz to smooth jazz to funk to pop to jazz fusion, you name it. Eric Marienthal can play it all and do it all very, very well, and has been doing it for well over 30 plus years. And today I am going to be talking about his entire catalogue of albums. He has released 13 studio albums under his name as a leader and 2 co-led albums with 2 other musicians, which I will also be covering. So that brings us to a total of 15 studio albums. And the first album we are going to be talking about is his debut album, which came out in 1988, and that is Voices of the Heart. Now, Voices of the Heart was released during Eric Marienthal's time as a member of the Chick Corea Electric Band, and a number of Electric Band members were starting to release their own solo albums, and Eric Marienthal was one of the first guys to do that. And Downbeat did say this album was good, but they said that it was nothing special here, and although he's a great player, it was too much David Sanborn-esque like chops. And in my opinion, I think this is one of Eric Marienthal's best albums. It's an album I always go back to listening to again and again, and it took me a lot of years to find this album, which was released on GRP Records, and I love it. You know, lots of favourite tracks of mine are on this album, and it's great from start to finish, and it's a very small list of musicians. So we've got Chick Corea on piano, who is featured on a number of tracks, and he also produced this album. Jim Cox on keyboards, John Patitucci on bass, also from the Electric Band, Vinnie Carlotto on drums, Pat Kelly on guitar, and Frank Gambale, who's also from the Electric Band, is featured on one track, and Louis Conti on percussion. So the core of the group is, of course, Marienthal, Patitucci, Carlotto, Kelly and Cox, but there are also guest appearances from his Electric bandmates. So this is an excellent album, no matter what the critics say. I love this album, and it's one I always go back to listening to. So tracks like Voices of the Heart, the title track, one of my favourites. Another track, Your Eyes, again another favourite of mine. Blue Space, which is actually one of my dad's favourite tracks, another great track. Brazilian Dream, love that track as well. Premonition, another great track, a very funky track. Tipping, lots of great funky bass playing from John Patitucci. Being With You, which has Frank Gambale on guitar and an unbelievable guitar solo. And we also got Being With You. another great track. Harvest Dance, again, love this track. Written in the Wind, Walk Like an Emu, and 2 bonus tracks, Someone Said and Backstep. Excellent album, start to finish. Lots of great favourite tracks of mine, and great playing from Eric Marienthal. Now, Marienthal doesn't really compose a lot of the tracks here. I think he's credited on maybe 1 or 2. A lot of the compositions are written by John Patitucci, Pat Kelly, and Chick Corea, but still more of a band effort. But it's great playing. Marienthal's on top form, as you'd expect, and I love it. It's one I always go back to listening to. So there you have it. Debut album, Voices of the Heart. Fantastic. So now we come to the next album, which was released in 1989, and this is Round Trip. Now, Round Trip doesn't really get talked about at all. No one really talks about this album, but this is an album I occasionally revisit, and it's a really good album. It's not as light as the first album. It's very much in the electric band sort of style of music, and it's really, really good. Chick Corea, John Patitucci, Mitchell Foreman, Dave Weckl, John Robinson, Carlos Rios, who some of you may remember played on the first Electric Band album back in '86, Alex Acuna, Dave Whitten, Don Grusin, Frank Gambale, and Lou Pardini. So we got the title track, Round Trip, great track. Moonwalk, another favourite track of mine. I'm Gonna Wait on Your Love, which is a vocal track with Lou Pardini. It's alright. I'm not really big on the vocal tracks, to be honest, but it's alright. It's not terrible, but again, I could really do without it. It's better than nothing. Reunion, Afrique, Leanne, beautiful track. The Road Goes On, and I'll Be Home Soon. Now, the track I'll Be Home Soon is an interesting track because this is the only track, I believe, in the entire history of the Electric Band that was recorded that doesn't feature Chick Corea himself. And it's the only album appearance of Frank Gambale that he plays keyboards only instead of guitar. And it's probably my favourite track of the entire album. It's very haunting, very laid back, and Frank Gambale is no Chick Corea on the keyboards, but he's no slouch here, and he plays more like piano, but there's some synth work going on in the background, and I think Patitucci plays a little bit of fretless bass on here, and it's a really good track. It's one I highly recommend you check out. And then we got 2 bonus tracks. The first one is Surgeon Jetty and Crash Test Dummies. As I said, not a terrible album. It's a good album. One I sometimes go back to listening to, and it's not one that really gets talked about that much when Eric Marienthal's solo albums are discussed, especially the GRP side of his career. But it's a good album. A lot of the tracks are composed by John Patitucci. Eric Marienthal is credited on a couple of tracks. He's got a couple of tracks he co-composes, but again, it's more other musicians who are composing the music, but this doesn't take away from the fact that this is still a great album. So, we move on to the next album, which was released in 1990, and that is Crossroads. Now, this is an album, it's a tough one between this and Voices of the Heart in terms of the GRP side of things, but I always go back to this album a lot, and, I think Marienthal may have read some of the critics' comments about what they said about his first 2 albums, but he really goes balls out on this one, and it's a very different album to the first 2. Much more harder hitting, much more fusion style driven in terms of the Electric Band style of music, among others, and it's an album I love. I always go back to this one. We've got, again, John Patitucci on bass, Chick Corea, Russell Ferranti from the Yellow Jackets, who plays a very big part on this album, which I will get into in a moment. Dave Weckl on drums, Vinnie Colaiuta on drums, Terry Lynn Carrington, who is absolutely on fire on this album, Alex Acuna on percussion, Dave Whitten on keyboards, and John Beasley also on keyboards. Now, Russell Ferranti, as you all know, is from the Yellow Jackets, and around this time, I think the Yellow Jackets were kind of on a little break because their man Mark Russo had just left, so a lot of the Yellow Jackets were doing session work. So Russell Ferrante plays a big part on this album. He's on virtually most of the tracks. He composed a lot of the music, and he really gives the music a Yellow Jackets sort of feel with his keyboard work. And there's some great playing from him, and to me, this is what a Yellow Jackets album would sound like if Eric Marienthal was in the band, because it's very much in the style of what the Yellow Jackets were doing back in the mid to late 80s. And as I said, he's the big difference maker on this album. And I believe there's even a track where we have Chick Corea and Russell Ferrante are playing together. What a treat that is. So we got the first track, The Sun Was In My Eyes. Great track. Now, Spoons is one of my favourite tracks, and this track, Spoons, would end up on Russell Ferrante's solo album, which was released earlier this year. And I love Spoons, unbelievable track. It's very much in the Yellow Jackets style of music. Great bass playing from John Patitucci as well. And we've got the next track, Yellow Roses, beautiful track. Upside Down, which to me is like the Chick Corea acoustic band on steroids, and Marienthal really gets to bust his chops here in a more of a acoustic, hard hitting style. And we've got Vinnie Colaiuta on drums on that track. Schmooze, which is a Frank Gambale composition, great sax work and great bass playing from John Patitucci. Cross Country, which has Corea and Ferrante together, excellent track. Hide and Seek, another great track. Two Bits, another great track. And On the Eve of Tomorrow, which is very much in the style of the Chick Corea electric band. And a haunting track, Rain on the Roof. Unbelievable album, start to finish. Another album I always go back to listening to. And this could very well be my favourite album. It's certainly up there with Voices of the Heart. It's just really, really good. Both completely different to one another, but at the same time, no duff tracks in sight, and an album, as I said, that I always go back to listening to. So, as we move along here, we come to the next album, which was released in 1991, and this could very well be Marienthal's most popular album of all time, and it's still in print to this day, and that is Oasis. Now, Oasis is, as I said, probably Marienthal's most popular album. It's been reissued half a dozen times, very easy to find, and it's unbelievable. You know, as I said, we've got musicians such as Jeff Lorber, who produced this album. Russell Ferrante and Jimmy Haslip of the Yellow Jackets play a big part on this album. Robin Ford, a former Yellow Jacket member. Lots of Yellow Jackets members on this, I've noticed. John Robinson, Alex Acuna, John Patitucci, Perry, Oliver Lieber, Alec Millerstein, and Machun. Really good album. Lots of different styles on this album compared to Crossroads. Bit of smooth jazz, bit of the jazz fusion, bit of gospel, bit of soul. There's a bit of everything on here, and it's a really good album. And as I said, there's a reason why this album is still in print, because it's so damn good. So the first track we got is Hustling, great dirty funky bass playing from John Patitucci. Seafood to Go, Oasis, which features Jimmy Haslip and Russell Ferrante, and to me this is like the Lost Yellow Jackets track. It's very beautiful, very slow and melodic, and Marienthal is kicking on all shoulders on soprano sax. Understanding, Trying to Tell Ya, Barcelona, another great favourite track of mine, which again is very much in the style of the Yellow Jackets. Big Country, again with the Yellow Jackets, same sort of thing, very similar sort of style of the Yellow Jackets music. Just to See You Again with Perry and Robin Ford, which is a vocal track, but I don't mind it. And then we got Turn Out the Lights, great track. And then another track, Another Shore, which is very similar to the Yellow Jackets Revelation. So, excellent album, and as I said, this could very well be a Yellow Jackets album, because they play a very big part in production and compositions, and Marienthal and the Yellow Jackets are an unbelievable team, and they work very, very well together. And Marienthal's always a guy that I've always wanted to see with the Yellow Jackets, and you know, you never say never, but I think they would match up very, very well. And as I said, a lot of the GRP albums, the Yellow Jackets play a very big part in Marienthal's music. So Oasis, great album, another album I always go back to listening to. So as we move along, fast forward a couple of years later to 1993, and we see the release of One Touch. Now, One Touch doesn't really get talked about that much, but it's a good album, some good tracks on there. I wouldn't necessarily say this was weak. It's still good, but as I said, there's some outstanding tracks here. So we've got Alex Acuna, Carl Anderson, David Benoit, Paulino Di Costa, Russell Ferranti and Jimmy Haslip again. These guys are getting around. Paul Jackson Jr., Dave Koz, Ivan Lins, Jeff Lorber, John Patitucci and John Robinson. And I think there's also a track where Jimmy Earl writes a track on there as well. So this is an album I occasionally revisit. So we've got other tracks like No Doubt About It, That's the Way, One for James, which features the Yellow Jackets, Walk Through the Fire, which features Carl Anderson on vocals. Good track. I like this one. I mean, I'm not big on vocal tracks, but I do like this one. Ouch, Westland, The Village, which features the Yellow Jackets, great track as well, and Tanto Amor, which features Ivan Lins on vocals, very haunting Brazilian bossa nova sort of track. Backtalk, and probably my favourite track on here is Where Are You, with David Benoit on keyboards and Jimmy Haslip on bass. Excellent album. Few tracks that I like are One for James, The Village, Tanto Amor, and as I mentioned, Where Are You. Unbelievable album. And even the tracks with Dave Koz, where you see the two of them trade sax solos. It's quite fun as well. And I'm not really big on two sax players together, but these guys don't disappoint, and it's a lot of fun. So highly recommend you check this out. It's really good. So we come to the next album, which was released in 1994, and this is another one of Marienthal's most popular albums, and I've actually heard him play this live once, and this is Street Dance. Now, Street Dance features David Benoit, Gary Burton. Even Gary Burton was mixing up with the smooth jazz guys. Insane. Paulino Di Costa, Anthony Fernandez, Paul Jackson Jr., Eric Jordan, Michael Landau, Jeff Lorber, who plays a big part on this album, Alec Mellerstein, Leroy Osborne, Jeff Pescetto, Eugene Powell, Nathaniel Phillips and John Robinson. Now this is an album I always go back to, listen to again and again, and another one of my favourite albums from the GRP era. So we've got title track Street Dance, Kid Stuff, Moment of Silence with Leroy Osborne on vocals. I'm not big on vocal tracks, as I said already, but I actually like this one. It's a good vocal track, and it's not overdone and it's not cheesy, but it's really, really good. Shake It Loose, Fafaru, Legenda, great guitar solo on this. Nothing But Everything, Where You Belong, Yosemite, Hold On My Heart, which is a Genesis cover version, Forces of Nature, another great vocal track with Leroy Osborne, and Have I Told You Lately. Excellent album. My favourite tracks are Street Dance, Moment of Silence, Hold On My Heart, Yosemite, and Have I Told You Lately, and Legenda, and Shake It Loose. In fact, I love all these tracks. What can I say? It's hard to choose really, but those tracks I mentioned are my favourites. So after this, Marienthal's GRP run would come to an end, and he would sign to IE Music, which is Lee Ritenour's old record label, and we see the release of Easy Street, which came out in 1997. It's a good album. It's pretty much a Lee Ritenour album, but it's still worth checking out. It's really good. And this track's got a bonus track called Tightrope, which is a Yellow Jackets composition with Russell Ferranti on keyboards, and it's a really good album. Good standout tracks such as Easy Street, The Sun Died, Tightrope, Backstage, and Secret Passion, among others. Love this album. Not really an album I go back and listen to often, but when I do, it always blows my mind, and this is one of Marienthal's biggest albums, I believe, and Lee Ritenour plays a big part of this album. He produced it, and he plays guitar on most of the album, and he's even co-composed a lot of the tracks with Marienthal, so Excellent album. Got musicians such as Rob Mullins, Melvin Davis, Sonny Emery, John Beasley, Russell Ferrante, among others. So yeah, really, really good. So the next album is a different album which came out in 1998, and this was a tribute album to Cannonball Adderley, and this has pretty much got a lot of his compositions but just redone in Marienthal style, and that is Walk Tall. Walk Tall, not really an album I go back to much, but there's some unbelievable playing and tracks. So we got Mercy Mercy, Work Song, Walk Tall, Skylark, Imagine That, The Way You Look Tonight, Here in My Heart, Someone, If You Need Me To, Country Preacher, Unit 7, Groove Runner. Really good album, lots of star power. Stanley Clarke on bass, Russell Ferrante, Harvey Mason, Lee Ritenour, among other great musicians who are featured on this album. Really good album. I love this one a lot. And yeah, it is Cannonball Adderley's music, but Marienthal does a really good job putting his own stamp on things. And yeah, I like it. It's good. It's not really one I go back to very often, but yeah, it's really good. And we've got other musicians like Rob Mullins, Michael Thompson, Val Johnson, lots of great players and lots of great musicians on this album. So there you have it, that's Walk Tall. So after leaving IE Music, Marienthal signs with Peak Records and he releases, which in my opinion could very well be the biggest album of his career, and that is Turn Up the Heat, which came out in 2001. Now, by this point, Marienthal was a member of the Rippingtons, and this album was produced by Russ Freeman, so it features Russ Freeman, Jeff Lorber, Denise Williams, Rick Vaughan, Chris Botti, Robin Ford, Vale Johnson, Alex Al, Dave Carpenter, Dave Hooper, Bill Heller, Gary Grant, Bill Reidenbach, Alan Harris, Rafael Solano, David Carasoni, Fred Clark and Louis Conti. Big star power names here. So standout tracks for me, we got the tracks like Everything She Wants, Lefty's Lounge, One Day in Venice, Taking It to the Streets, Love Don't Live Here, Sugar, San Mocha Square, Rendezvous, Hold On, Hanging on the Boardwalk and Remember Our Promise. Excellent album, as I said, probably his biggest album of his career. My favourite tracks are Everything She Wants, Rendezvous, Hold On, Remember Our Promise and Lefty's Lounge. Excellent album, really, really good and very commercially popular. You know, there's a lot of big tracks they used to play on smooth jazz radio, and those tracks I mentioned were very big tracks for Marienthal's album. So unbelievable album, another one I always go back to. So as we move along, we come to the next album, which was released in 2003, and that is Sweet Talk. Now Sweet Talk again was a very popular album, and again a lot of these tracks were very big fan favourite tracks on smooth jazz radio. So we've got Jason Miles, Jeff Lorber, Chuck Loeb, Will Lee, Dean Brown, Tom Barney, Chris Parker, Gene Lake, Ivan Lins, Cassandra Reed, Mark Quifones, Romero Lombardo, Jeff Mironov, Mike Riccinuti, Julia Fernandez, Melvin Davis, Gananin Arnold, Scott Bredman and Bill Heller. Great album. Best tracks for me, I would say, is Sweet Talk, Uptown, Like a River and Laguna, and we've got other tracks such as Secrets, All I Am, Moonlight, Tell Me Something Good, Miss Trail, Caprirosa, Nickel Plated and Like a River, not to be confused with the Yellow Jackets track, and as I said, Laguna. Great album from start to finish, and again another popular album commercially for Marienthal. I would say that Marienthal's albums on Peak Records were the biggest of his career and certainly his most successful commercially, so excellent album. And again, another one I always go back to now and then. So the next album was released in 2004. It's again a very different album, and this is called Got You Covered. Now, there's a much more smaller ensemble of musicians compared to his previous recordings. So we've got Russ Freeman on guitars, Russell Franti on keyboards, Peter Erskine on drums, Dave Carpenter on bass, Louis Conti and Chick Corea, who is featured on one track. And this album is mostly cover versions of popular songs, and it's a good album. It's a really good album. I Will, New York State of Mind, Love and Liberty, Compared to What, I've Got the World on a String, Emotion, Two-Part Invention, 4 in D minor, My One and Only Love, You've Got a Friend, Stand By Me, Moody's Mood for Love. Good album. Great versions of these cover tracks, and I would say my favourite tracks on here are Love and Liberty, My One and Only Love, which is a duet track with Chick Corea, Moody's Mood for Love, You've Got a Friend. Good album. I don't really want to go back too much, but I think I probably will at some point, and this album was produced by Russ Freeman. So we've got a real supergroup here. So we've got Russ Freeman of the Rippingtons, Russell Franti of the Yellow Jackets, Peter Erskine of Weather Report, Dave Carpenter, who's played with just about everybody from Alan Holdsworth to Lee Ritenour, Louis Conti, who has played with just about everyone, and Chick Corea, who is a living legend, and of course he is Eric Marienthal's electric bandmate. Really good album. Unbelievable. So we move forward now to the next album. God, this guy's done a lot of albums. And this came out in 2007, and this is called Just Around the Corner. Good album. Again, very popular, very commercial. And tracks we've got is Blue Water, Times Square, Flower Child, Open Road, Oceanfront, Just Around the Corner, the title track, I Believe in You, Dance With Me, Your Move, Lost Without You. Really good album. It was produced by Brian Culbertson. Nice. I like Brian Culbertson. He's a really good musician himself. So tracks like Blue Water, Just Around the Corner, I Believe in You, Dance With Me, Lost Without You, standout tracks, but really good. Another good album. This guy hasn't done a bad album as far as I'm concerned. Even if there's some albums that are not as strong as others, there's always lots of catchy songs and lots of great playing. So Dave Weckles on this album as well. He plays drums on a few tracks, and yeah, it's really, really good. So we come to the last album that Marienthal has done as a leader, and this came out in 2012, and this is called It's Love. This was produced by Chuck Loeb, and it's got Russell Franti on keyboards, Gary Novick on drums, and other musicians as well. Good album. Not really one I go back to often, but it's a perfect album to listen to with a loved one or by yourself with a glass of whiskey, and you just want to put your feet up and relax. So it's a really nice, laid-back, relaxing album. So we've got Get Here, In a Sentimental Mood, Can't Buy Me Love, It's Love, 2 in 1, Costa del Sol, Baby Cakes, Cafe Royale, Saint Moritz, and When I Found You, which in my opinion, When I Found You is the most beautiful track on the entire album, and it features Brian Culbertson on piano and Marienthal on soprano sax. Great album. Not one, as I said, I go back to often, but at the same time, really, really good. I really enjoy listening to this one a lot. So that would be it for Marienthal's albums as a leader, but he would also do 2 co-led project albums with 2 other musicians. And this one is a joint album with Chuck Loeb called Bridges, which was released in 2015, and it's mostly a duo album with Marienthal on saxophones and Chuck Loeb on electric and acoustic guitars. And there's some guest musicians on here as well, John Patitucci and Brian Landham on drums and David Charles on percussion. But it's mostly just Marienthal and Loeb just playing together as a duo. And these two together, Chuck Loeb is my favourite jazz guitarist who we sadly lost back in 2017. And to see these two just hook up together and make a duo album was a dream come true for me, to have my favourite sax player and my favourite guitarist working together, and it's a beautiful album. Tracks we've got is Westward Crossing, Parentes, Last Minute Blues, Daily Bread, Lucky Southern, Salmonaca, Duality, Sunrays, and more. I would say my favourite tracks are Westward, Crossing, and Last Minute Blues. Really good album. Really like going back to this one a lot. And what can you say? It's not really that big. I don't think a lot of people know about this, except maybe the fans probably know about this album a lot. But I do go back to this one often, and it's a really good album, and I like it a lot. And I think this would be one of Chuck Loeb's last recordings before he passed away. I think he did release another album under his name shortly after this, but I think this is one of the last albums he recorded before his passing. But it's an unbelievable album. As I said, it's not really a smooth jazz album, it's a much more laid back album compared to earlier Marienthal recordings, but still worth checking out. Bridges, love it. And this album came out in 2020, and this is another joint co-project, and this is with trumpeter Randy Brecker, Double Dealing. It's a really good album. I recently listened to this again, and think of the Electric Band if they added a trumpet player, because this is pretty much what it sounds like. It just sounds like the Electric Band with a trumpet player. So we've got George Whitty on keyboards, John Patitucci on bass, and Dave Weckl on drums. Star power galore. Love it. So we've got Double Dealing, Three Deuces, Fast Lane, Mind for Fire, which is dedicated to Chuck Loeb, Sambop, You Gotta Give It, True North, The Hipster, Jet Lag, and Habanero. Really good album. Marienthal and Randy Brecker really work well together. They've played together before in the GRP All-Star Big Band, but this is the first time that they've actually collaborated together and did a co-led project, and it's really good. And as I said, it's not a smooth jazz album, it's more of a jazz fusion album, but that's not a bad thing. And great playing from George Whitty, Marienthal, Patitucci and Weckl, and as I said, it's an all-star band. It's great playing. And standout tracks for me, I would say, is Double Dealing, Fast Lane, Sambop, True North, and The Hipster. But lots of great tracks from start to finish. And I just recently listened to this, as I said earlier, and yeah, really good album. And hopefully, maybe we might see these guys play it live one day. Who knows? But we'll see. But I'd love to see these guys do another album, because I think Randy Brecker and Eric Marienthal work really well together. And also, you know, I'm not really a fan of saxophone and trumpet playing together, depending on who the musicians are, but when you get two musicians of this caliber, you can't go wrong. They deliver, and unbelievable playing from both men, and a great band as well. How good is that? So you've virtually got all of the Electric Band except Chick Corea and Frank Barley, so excellent. So, which album do I think was the best album? Oh boy, this is tough. I love them all. Some more than others, but if I have to choose one album, I mean, I go back and forth on favourites, because I can't really pick a favourite, but I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to do a top 3, if I had to do a top 3 favourite albums. There's no particular order, but if I had to do a joint top 3 albums, I will probably choose, 1 minute, I would probably choose out of these 3, probably out of these 3, they're joint favourites of mine. But if I had to choose which is my favourite Marienthal album of all time, it's a tough one. Probably I'm going to go back and change these again, but I'd probably say my favourite album of Eric Marienthal's that I go back to the most out of these 3 is probably this one. I'd probably say Turn Up the Heat is the best Eric Marienthal album of his entire career, and as I said, he had a lot of commercial success with this album. I would probably choose this one as his best one, but if I had to choose my personal favourite, I would probably go with this one. As much as I love Voices of the Heart, because it's the first album, I'd probably go with Crossroads as my all-time favourites, because it's very much, as I said earlier, in the style of the Yellow Jackets, and Russell Franti plays a big part in this album. Great playing from John Patitucci, unbelievable playing from Eric Marienthal, and I just love this album. I just love this album so much, and this is probably one I go back to the most, followed closely by Voices of the Heart and Turn Up the Heat. But if I had to choose one, I'd definitely go with this one. I love this album. It's really, really good. And hard to believe this is now almost 31 years when this came out, and it still sounds as fresh as the day it came out. Doesn't sound dated, doesn't age a single day, and it sounds better than it ever did, and the production on this is just top notch, as you'd expect from GRP. So there you have it. Joint three favourites: Voices of the Heart, Turn Up the Heat and Crossroads, but Crossroads comes out on top as the all-time favourite of yours truly. So there you have it. That's all of Eric Marienthal's solo albums, and there is a best of called Eric Marienthal Collection, which compiles all of his GRP albums as a compilation, greatest hits sort of thing. But as I said, Eric Marienthal's my favourite sax player, and he's made some tremendous music, and I'm looking forward to whenever he releases a new album, whenever that will be. Hopefully it'll be one under his name this time, because it's long overdue. I think it's been about 9 years since Eric Marienthal released an album under his name. I know he's released a number of co-led projects, but it'd be nice to see him release something of his own, because he's long overdue. So there you have it. That's all of Eric Marienthal's catalogue. Crossroads is my all-time favourite. Do you have any favourite albums of your own? Doesn't necessarily have to be mine. Maybe you might have one that's completely different to the one I've chosen. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until then, take care everybody, and stay safe.